Hey mamas, it's your CajunStork here. I am coming to you on this very special Midwife Monday for a Labor Day special. We're going to talk all about labor today, what labor is not, how we diagnose labor or like failure to progress. I'm sure you've heard about that. Ways that we can speed up labor, and also what pain relief options we have available for labor. But before I begin, my name is Midwife Kyra, and I believe in truly natural birth because I know it makes for better birth experiences. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and joining in today's conversation where we're going to talk about all about your special Labor Day. Why do we need a good definition to understand labor? Well, one of the biggest reasons is to avoid a C-section from what we call like failure to progress or labor dystocia. So basically in 2011, 1/3 of U.S. women gave birth by C-section. Y'all, that's 1 in 3 women in America gave birth by C-section in 2011. So ACOG, which is kind of the group who oversees birth in America, they were like, okay, this is a huge leap from, in this case, 1996. We need to look into this and see what's going on. It was such a quick increase that they started to think, well, maybe some of these C-sections could have been preventable. So when they started diving into the research and figuring out why such a huge increase of women had C-sections, they realized the number one reason that women in America were having C-sections was from labor dystocia. Now, dystocia is just a fancy name for like slow or not really working well. But what this equates to is nearly half of the first-time moms who had C-sections during this time were receiving a C-section from failure to progress or labor dystocia. Nearly half of first-time moms, you guys, this is outrageous. This means that they believe that half of these first-time moms' bodies cannot give birth without assistance, and that's absolutely absurd. In fact, worldwide, it's actually thought that only 3 to 6% of women actually would have a diagnosis of like labor dystocia, that labor would like truly stop on its own and need assistance or possibly even a C-section to give birth. And in fact, in planned home births, on average, only 4% of women currently today, only 4% of women with planned home births with midwives in America have a labor dystocia. So 34% of those in 2011 had it, but realistically, we should expect only about 4% of women should have this. And so ACOG says, oh, you know what? Maybe labor progresses a little slower than we thought. And we might need to update our guidelines on this a little bit. I agree. So how long does active labor last? Well, when we're thinking about labor, labor actually has 2 phases. They have like latent labor or early labor and active labor. When most of us think about labor, we're thinking about the active phase of labor, which I'm going to touch on in a minute. Back in the day when they were studying labor, they were talking about Friedman's curve, which, long story short, it's a chart on how fast we expect you to give birth to your baby. And we once thought, 1960s or so, that women would progress about 1 centimeter an hour starting at 0 centimeters, or like the onset of labor, and would progressively go about 1 centimeter an hour until they deliver. Moms who've had a baby before, so repeat moms, you might deliver in like progress 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters an hour. But thanks to ACOG, we're now realizing, oh, labor might be progressing a little bit more slower than we thought. So much so that they actually think maybe women are actually dilating about 0.5 centimeter an hour, and it doesn't even start till 4 to 6 centimeters, becoming more regular. And for moms who've had babies before, you can expect about 1 centimeter to 1.3 centimeters an hour. I mean, no one's actually in there measuring, but this is the estimate. But again, this new idea comes with the idea that these timelines don't start until active labor has begun. And this is why it's so important that we have a definite understanding of what labor is. So let's define labor. Like, what are you picturing when you think of a woman in labor? Well, let's do a case study. So a woman is 40 weeks pregnant, shows up to her routine doctor's appointment. Doctor does a vaginal exam because the woman says she's been having a contraction about once an hour since about 4 in the morning. So she is 4 centimeters and 80% effaced. Her contractions are about 1 an hour. Do you guys think that she's in labor? Let me know in the comments below. Now, this is kind of where we differ, doctors versus midwives, right? Typically, what you can expect from a physician is that a doctor in a mom's 40 weeks, 4 centimeters, and contracting, I don't think a contraction hour is contracting, but she's contracting. Most of the time, doctors will offer to admit the mom, observe her, and possibly induce her because, oh my gosh, you're in labor. Why not, right? That's super exciting. But this might actually increase your risk of a C-section. That if you're not actively contracting, we may not be defining ourselves as in labor. So as a midwife, what I would do in this case study is, believe it or not, I would send her home with something called Expectant Management, which basically I'm gonna give her labor precautions. Here's how often I want your contractions to come. Here's how you monitor your baby. Look for warning signs that your water breaks. Eat, take a nap. I'll see you later, right? Because you're not in active labor. Now, how do I know this? Well, give me just a second. I'm gonna define active labor for you. But when we all think of labor, what we're thinking about is like true labor or real labor or active labor. And again, this comes in, labor actually has three stages and 2 phases, latent and active. To define labor, there's a simple definition that we can use to define active labor. Stay tuned. What is labor not? Well, first of all, labor is not Braxton Hicks contractions. These are practice contractions you get at about 16 or so weeks pregnant. They do not dilate the cervix, although there is some information saying that they might affect some of the softening or the effacement of the cervix. But it's really good warm-up stuff, you guys. Braxton Hicks contractions are like training for a marathon, the marathon being birth, of course. And it's really, really good stuff, but they are not labor. Typically, Braxton Hicks contractions will stop when you do the opposite of what you've been doing. So for example, I often in my practice have moms calling me saying, I've been contracting all day and I've been running errands and trying to get things together. So I'll say, go lay in the tub, drink a lot of water and rest. Let's see what happens. And poof, these Braxton Hicks contractions stop. Braxton Hicks contractions will stop with position change or hydration. So that's not labor because nothing will stop labor. And they do not intensify. So even if you're having Braxton Hicks contractions like consistently, even 5 minutes apart, 10 minutes apart, the one thing about Braxton Hicks contractions is they do not intensify. They're kind of just the same, even if you're having a lot of them. Now, Braxton Hicks contractions are not the same thing as early labor, what we call latent phase of labor. The definition of early labor is the onset of the mother's perception that she's having contractions. And if you saw my stages and phases of labor video, then you know from my personal birth story, I was out Christmas tree shopping all day with contractions about 5 to 7 minutes apart. And I'm like, I've been contracting all day. Let me time these to have my baby in my arms about 12 hours later. Now, in latent phase or an early phase of labor, what you'll notice, unlike Braxton Hicks, is that those contractions will get stronger, longer, and closer together. And they do have effects on the cervix. Now, you're not necessarily going to get to 6 centimeters dilated, but you might have 1 centimeter and then later 2 centimeters. But with this new information we have about the definition of, or like the redefining of Friedman's curve, we no longer expect you to dilate 1 centimeter an hour in this early phase of labor. So this early phase of labor can last a while. We call it prolonged when for first-time moms it lasts about 20 hours, but honestly, I've seen it last a while. Now in my practice, what I typically see is moms will text me that they've been contracting all day, just like my birth story. And when the sun goes down is when active labor really kicks in. Now, other considerations before we jump into what active labor is something called prodromal labor, which actually a mom mentioned in the comments in one of my pictures earlier today. Have we talked about prodromal labor? Now, if you've had prodromal labor, you know exactly what I'm about to say. Prodromal labor are contractions that last pretty consistently, about 5 to 10 minutes apart or less, but they don't progress. And in fact, they stay pretty consistent, but the reason why we call it prodromal is because it can last forever. There's no end or timeline for prodromal labor. Could be an afternoon, could be a week. Right, you heard that right, a week of contractions every 5 to 10 minutes apart. So when you hear these stories of moms who are like, I was in labor for 5 days, what they experienced was prodromal labor. Now, the good news about prodromal labor is that it's not this awful active labor intense experience, but it is a mind game. Like, it really will break you down when you're having contractions every 5 minutes apart for days. You start to think you're crazy. And how are you going to know when you're actually in labor, right? It's really stressful. So let's not downplay the emotional part of prodromal labor. But a lot of the things about prodromal labor is mind over matter. So once we identify that we're in prodromal labor, I often will tell my moms, I really want you to nap. I want you to go about your life as much as usual. I want you to eat. I want you to rest. I do not want you to try and kickstart active labor when you're having prodromal labor, because this can go on for days. I see this very often. So prodromal labor is something a little bit more common, and many times in a physician setting or in a hospital setting, we will go to the hospital and get induced because things are moving. They're just moving very slowly. But if we leave labor alone, because we know, again, I've said this 100 times, but when labor is working, the more we leave it alone, the safer it is. Prodromal labor is a normal condition of labor, even though we don't always all the time see it. Okay, so let's talk about active labor, true versus false labor, or real versus false labor. Now, I don't like this term false labor. It makes women believe that the contractions that they're having are not making progress, and this is absolutely not true. Like, every single contraction counts, you guys, whether it's a Braxton Hicks, it's an early labor, it's an active labor. The fact is, you have to warm up before you run a 21-mile marathon. So all these things count. So don't let the term false labor, get under your skin like it does mine. False labor, they're irregular contractions. They do not get stronger, longer, and closer together. They stop when you get into the bathtub, or when you rest, or when you hydrate. Typically, they happen at night, and when the sun comes up, they're gone. I see that all the time, very common. You're able to talk and walk through your false labor contractions. You're like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm having a contraction like right now. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Like, this is early or false labor. And of course, if we're doing vaginal exams, which I do not recommend routinely in early labor, there'll be minimal or no cervical change felt. But active labor is where things get really exciting. This is the time of labor that requires comfort measures to stay comfortable. It's when moms go from having conversations and excitement to working really hard to get their babies out. The contractions are consistent. And what's so amazing about our bodies is that these contractions are consistent to almost the second when you're timing them. I use the Full Term app in my practice. I recommend it to my clients, where literally you're pressing start and stop when you're having contractions. You will notice that your contractions are timable to almost the second when you're in active labor, which I just think is absolutely amazing every time. But in addition to being timable, they gain in intensity and they gain in frequency. So what started as 15 minutes apart and then 10 minutes apart is now starting to get 5 minutes apart and 4 minutes apart, and they're getting stronger and longer and closer together. That's one of the signs that you're probably having active labor contractions. They don't stop. You can get in the water, you can go for a walk, you can take a nap, they're going to wake you up. That's active labor. And typically my clients say that active labor contractions kind of start in your lower back and they wrap around in like a wave-like fashion to your front, rather than being like menstrual crampy and not really going anywhere. And eventually, especially if you have high pain tolerance, even if you're not uncomfortable yet, we'll start to notice a change in your demeanor. Moms who are usually really bubbly start to kind of go within themselves. They take a lot longer to have conversations. They're moving a lot slower. And if we are doing vaginal exams, you'll notice they're at least 4, if not 6 centimeters dilated. That is your sign you're in active labor. ACOG describes active labor as, and I'm reading this, so quote, the point at which the rate of cervical change significantly increases, which we used to say active labor started at 4 centimeters. Now we're saying it actually starts at 6 centimeters. I was reading a ton of studies today. Some of them said 5 centimeters. So I'm going to say anything greater than 4. But let's keep it simple. Believe it or not, the most important, simplest, easy to distinguish diagnosis and definition of active labor is contractions that cause cervical change. So labor is defined as contractions that cause cervical change. I've seen moms come in for just requesting a vaginal exam just because they want to know. 6 to 8 centimeters dilated, but not contracting. So is she in labor? No, she's not. Because labor is defined as contractions that cause cervical change. You need both to be in active labor. Now, I know some of you are watching this and you're like, wait. We talked a lot in my YouTube videos about avoiding vaginal exams in labor, and I'm still completely in agreement with that. I'm just letting you know, if you go to a hospital or if your labor's taking a long time, especially in my practice, and we need to do a vaginal exam, you need to have contractions that cause cervical change. We need proof of this. So that is the definition of active labor. Super simple. But guess what else we've learned? You cannot have labor dystocia, which we talked about earlier, until you're at least 6 centimeters if you've gone into labor naturally or what we call spontaneously on your own. That means even if labor is going very, very slowly, and instead of dilating a centimeter an hour, you're dilating a centimeter every 3 hours, that there is no indication for a C-section, just for failure to progress if your labor is moving very, very slowly. Now, I realize that this can cause some emotions in some of you who may have been that, 1 in 3 women who had a C-section for failure to progress. And now that you're learning a little bit about this, you might realize like, ooh, maybe my doctor jumped the gun a little bit. Well, ACOG is starting to acknowledge that. The doctors are jumping the gun a little bit. And so what I want you to know is that as long as you're making progress, it's okay to withhold a C-section for failure to progress, as long as you, mom and baby, are both doing fine. So labor dystocia or labor arrest, in ACOG's words, are defined as spontaneous labor of moms who are at least 6 centimeters, because that's active labor. We have to give you a chance, right? And water broken. So if your water's not broken, let them break your water at this point before they do a C-section to see if that'll move things along. And at least 4 hours of adequate contractions, or they're even saying 6 hours of even kind of so-so contractions before we make a diagnosis and jump into a C-section when mom or baby are doing well. This is all about spontaneous labor. We have a different set of guidelines when it comes to induction of labor, and I actually wrote them down here. I'm not really sure if you guys are all that interested in that, but considering that over 40% of women are starting their labor by being induced, it is relevant. It says that the new guidelines for augmented labors is at least 24 hours of Pitocin, or 18 hours after your water's been broken with Pitocin, before we would consider it like labor arrest or failure to progress that would require a C-section. This is why you need to prepare for labor support, because labor can last a really long time. So let's jump into the fun stuff. What can we do to speed up our labor? First of all, expectant management. I talked about earlier how instead of sending my client to get her induced and try and get things going, I want her to be well rested, I want her to be well fed, and I want her to wait patiently until labor begins on its own, because it will go quickly if it goes on its own, unless, if we start intervening, it's going to start messing up things. Number 2, fetal positioning. If you ever talked about, watch my video on sunny side up babies, or what we call OP, babies who are facing the wrong way when they're in labor. And I'm not talking breech, I'm talking facing your belly with the cute little kicks in the front. These labors are actually much longer than labors where baby's facing the correct way. And so we can work on fetal positioning at the end of our pregnancy and in our labor to help baby get into the right position for the birth. And your best website for this, if you don't have a doula in your back pocket or a midwife that you're working with, is spinningbabies.com. I know it's a super weird name, but it's an amazing website that'll teach you about optimal fetal positioning. And baby being in the right position can speed up your labor tremendously. So don't take this for granted, you guys. Look up how to get your baby in the right positions. And also laboring in upright positions, sitting up, hands and knees, squatting, walking, all of these things, pretty much anything but being on your back in the bed will actually speed up your labor. So you want to consider that if you're trying to make things move faster. I could title this video, How to Have a Faster and Easier Labor by Using Upright Positions, because really they make a huge difference. In fact, which reminds me, I actually next month am doing an entire 3-part series on comfort measures in labor, and upright positions is one of the videos. Pitocin. I know, but Pitocin is actually proven to speed up your labor. It sucks. It is longer, stronger, and closer together contractions than anything you would have naturally. It does increase potential risk to your baby, overstimulating the uterus, uterine rupture. There are risks to Pitocin that you may not be aware of, but it does increase your labor. So if your doctor's talking about failure to progress or labor dystocia, and they're talking about a section, I encourage you to consider Pitocin before you jump into a section, because Pitocin can save you from an unnecessary C-section. It's the overuse of it that's causing problems, the unnecessary use of it. But there are times that Pitocin can be greatly beneficial in labor. Okay, and here's another one you're going to be surprised to hear me say, but breaking your water. Used to induce labor, breaking your water may actually increase your risk of a C-section. But while you're in spontaneous labor, breaking your water can actually shorten the length of your labor process. They say it's about 1 to 1.5 hours for moms who've had a baby before. But for moms who've never had a baby before, first-time moms, it can actually shorten your labor by about 4 hours. Now again, I firmly believe that the less we do to birth when it's working, the safer it is. And I don't think you should be jumping into your water breaking just to have a faster labor. I think you should do the things I'm about to talk about to set yourself up for a good birth experience. But again, these are tools in our toolbox that we can use and take advantage of before we walk into a surgery, a C-section, to have our babies. Let's not forget about the emotional component of labor that actually speeds up our labor. Yes, the emotional component. The psychological and mental status of the mother absolutely affects her progression in labor. So I've been to births where mom and dad have, like home births where mom and dad have been fighting for days, right? Mom will kickstart and stop, kickstart and stop. And then all of a sudden they work things out. Emotionally, they're good. Everything's good. And poof, she has her baby in hours, just a few short hours. But there are other factors that could play in emotionally. One of them is fear. So if you're delivering in a birth environment that causes you fear or tension, you can expect to actually have a more painful labor. There's actually a term for this. It's called the fear, tension, pain cycle. And basically what it means is when we're fearful, we're putting tension in our bodies, right? How do we put tension in our bodies? We bring our shoulders up to our ears and we squish our face and we smash our hands. Well, when we're doing this, we're actually pulling the blood flow away from our uterus into these other muscles, which causes our uterus to have to work harder, and it makes our labor more painful. As our labor gets more painful, we get more fearful, and this cycle of fear, tension, pain just continues. It gets out of control. And so getting a good childbirth education class under your belt before you go into labor can help to stop this fear, tension, pain cycle before it even starts. They will help you get educated on what your options are, help you know what to expect in your birthing environment, and help you set up a birth plan for yourself and your birth team to follow so that you can be more relaxed, so you can release, and so you can accept and enjoy your amazing birth experience. So getting a good childbirth education class is just so important. Move the camera. And I'm so excited that right here in Lafayette, we recently got hypnobirthing back, like last month, you guys. In my first year as a midwife, I actually helped my clients pay for their hypnobirthing classes because it made such a huge difference in their birth experiences. So in addition to Lamaze, if you're looking for a good class, hypnobirthing is back, and it's so amazing, and it's going to change your birth experience, and I definitely recommend it. What else works? Doulas. Again, I know I always talk about doulas, but they're amazing. Doulas tremendously help your labor go faster, help you have a better birth experience, help you need less pain management in labor. In fact, the studies say that doulas reduce the length of your labor by 25%. And who doesn't want a shorter, more relaxed, happier labor, right? And doulas reduce your need for a C-section by 50%. 50%, you guys, this is amazing. Like if doulas were a drug, it would be unethical not to use it. So strongly consider hiring a doula for your birth. I know it's kind of weird to think about inviting a stranger to your birth, but y'all, these are professionals, and the doulas of Mother Birth here in Lafayette are amazing, and they're skilled and they're experienced, and they're going to make a huge difference in your birth experience. What else? Midwives. Midwives, I mean, if you think doulas are amazing, like, not to pat midwives on the back because I am one, but midwives are amazing, you guys. The C-section rate for a midwife can be anywhere from 4 to 11%. Where our local hospital C-section rate is like 20 to 40%, depending on what doctor you have. This is just an incredible difference. And Louisiana has some of the highest C-section rates in the country. So if you hire a midwife, you're reducing your risk of a C-section. You're reducing the length of your labor because just like a doula, midwives are with you continuously throughout your labor process. And again, you're planning to have a shorter, easier, happier birth. I think I read a study that said 93% of families who have give birth with a midwife, including the fathers, just rave about having such a positive birth experience. Even if they ended up transferring to the hospital, had a positive birth experience by choosing midwives. So midwives are a way that you can speed up your labor. Laboring in a comfortable environment in upright positions, again. Does your birthing environment have a birth tub or a shower that you can labor in comfortably while you're in labor? Can you eat and drink in labor? Can you move around freely? Like, do you have a window in your room? That's really important. You want to labor in a comfortable environment, because if you're laboring in an environment that brings you stress, or you're one of those people that need a window and you don't have a window, you're going to start that fear, tension, pain cycle all over again. And last, build your birth team. So doulas, midwives, fathers, friends, grandparents, who's on your birth team and what is their roles? Also, physicians, nurses, who's on your birth team? You actually do better in a birthing environment where there are no strangers in your birth, because birth is a really intimate experience. And if you're laboring freely, you're going to be moving around hands and knees positions completely naked. That can be really vulnerable for many women. And so you want to really build a birth team and birth an environment that you're comfortable in. Okay, so those are some natural things you can do to stay comfortable in labor. I have that series coming up next month, like I said, that's going to be talking about how to use a birth ball and a birthing stool and a rebozo and other techniques in labor, like dip the hip and other things that you can do to keep yourself comfortable and your baby in a good position. But natural childbirth is not for everyone, so I want to talk a little bit about medicinal options for you in labor. So there's two different ways that we can use medicine in labor. One is called analgesics and one is called anesthetics. Analgesics are, picture like Demerol, or like they're opioids, medications that you can take, except because you're in labor, we're not going to give them to you by mouth, we're going to give them to you in an IV. What's great about analgesics is that they can be given in early labor. So if you're that mom that's suffering from prodromal labor, or a really, really long early phase, or a prolonged active labor, analgesics can be given to you through an IV that can help you take a really good nap. And then you'll wake up and you'll still have that complete freedom of movement to have the unmedicated birth from then on that you desire. They do reduce your awareness and alertness. So like there's the pro of it being immediate. It will work in less than 5 minutes. and it lasts about 3 to 4 hours typically, but it can make you nauseated. I've had many moms complain of the loopiness. They kind of feel a little out of control. And you definitely wouldn't want to use these medications if you have a history of narcotic addiction. But okay, so some of the medications that they offer are Demerol, which I haven't seen in a while. Typically I see Stadol and Nubane. And I can't remember which one it is, but I think it's Stadol that we mix it with Phenergan. And we all know Phenergan. Phenergan's the medication that helps you with vomiting, but like knocks you out. So it's kind of the goal is if you're going to take the step of taking analgesics in labor for pain relief, you don't want to fight it. I always tell my moms, if you're taking it through an IV, the goal is to lay down and take a good 3 or 4 hour nap so that you can have the energy to keep going. So really make an effort to not fight the medications when you're taking them. And what I mean is it's not time to hold a conversation or try and visit or talk about how uncomfortable you are or whatever the case may be. It's really time to just kind of lean in and let those medications do their jobs. Now, anesthetics. You should wait until active labor to take things like an epidural, for example. What's great about an epidural is it blocks the sensations that you're feeling. So you're not feeling pain, but you are kind of not able to really move your legs or use that part of your body either. So you are going to have a catheter placed in because you're not going to be able to empty your bladder appropriately after they give you the epidural. The epidural can take a few minutes to start working, and it can take up to an hour once you order it to receive it. And it actually can lengthen your labor. But it is one of the most common methods of pain relief. And it can be used in addition to the analgesics. So for example, if you're really having a tough time, you can order Nubane, and while you're waiting for the epidural, your Nubane can kick in and help you relax so your epidural gets in where you'll be completely not feeling what's going on. Now, there are some risks to the epidural that many people don't talk about. The most common one is the risk of it dropping your blood pressure. So when you order an epidural, the first thing they're going to do is bolus IV fluids in you, like big bags of fluids, to try and help counteract your blood pressure, because low blood pressure can be a huge danger to your baby. This is how your baby gets oxygen. So we really want to make sure your blood pressure levels are nice and stable. I also very commonly will see fever from an epidural. That's a common side effect. Itching skin. It's temporary, but it's awful. You can feel the itch, even if you can't move your legs. And there's something called hot spots, and this is little areas of like inadequate pain relief. So I've seen women where one half of their bodies is numb, but they can feel it on the other half. Or the hot spot where literally a little circle in certain parts of their body, they can feel the contraction, and they call it hot because it feels like a burning sensation because you're not feeling the actual contraction. But again, the epidural has been used for years now, and many, many women have great success with it, and it is an option for you even late. I've seen it given as late as 8 and even 9 centimeters in labor. And then if you're planning, and also about the epidural, you can continuously receive medication in the catheter that they put in your spinal column, and so you can have an epidural for long labors. A spinal is a medication that they're going to inject into you, but it's only meant for like an hour or two. So if you're having a planned C-section, they'll give you a spinal instead of an epidural. But these are not something that you would typically like use in labor. It's only typically used for a C-section. All right, less common medications. We don't have it here in Louisiana yet, but nitrous oxide is being used around the country, particularly in Canada. And that one's kind of iffy. You know, nitrous oxide is laughing gas, like what your dentist gives you. It is a little controversial right now because we're starting to understand a little bit more about the MTHFR gene, and there are some speculations or even studies, I'm not really sure, forgive me if I'm misinformed, that are saying that this is not actually a safe option for moms or babies with this condition. So there's just not a lot of information out there on that. And of course, the last one is general anesthesia, where they give you the medication, knock you out as if you're having a regular surgery. And although this is an option, this is not your best option for birth, for a C-section. It is really like a worst case scenario circumstance, because at the end of the day, with general anesthesia, not only do you not get to see your baby born, But when you're under general, they actually don't allow you to have people in the room with you, and so your husband won't get to see the baby being born either. So general anesthesia is typically used for dire emergencies where they have to deliver the baby immediately. This isn't like an option you would want to quickly, take advantage of. Tori Carrier brought up that nipple stimulation and the breast pump can be used in place of oxytocin as well. And she is so right. This is such an amazing way to stimulate labor and make things go faster. Let's see. She also said, how do you decide when to go to your birthplace? Whew, okay. I think you're right, Tori. I think this should be its own birth video. In the meantime, this is a conversation you want to have with your doctor or your midwife about how to know when to go. I really appreciate you joining me for this Labor Day special for this Midwife Monday. Delivering a baby on Labor Day has been on my bucket list since I became a student back in 2009, and I have yet to deliver a baby on Labor Day, and I've got less than 6 hours. So we'll see. But anyway, thanks for joining me this Midwife Monday. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.